I didn't know my life was about to end in a steakhouse, surrounded by people who weren't even part of it. Instead, it became the moment I finally stopped pretending. We were sitting in a downtown Boston steakhouse, one of those dimly lit places that tries too hard to feel intimate. My husband, Daniel, had gone to Boston University, and 6 of his old college friends were there. Women he'd laughed with, lived with, shared a past with long before I existed. I was the outsider at the table, the wife who arrived after the story had already been written. I remember holding my glass, barely sipping, listening as the wine flowed and the volume rose. And then the conversation shifted. One woman showed off her engagement ring, twisting her hand under the light. Another talked about dating apps, spontaneous weekends, the freedom of being single. At some point, someone laughed and said, "God, I'm so glad I'm not married yet. There's still so much living to do before settling down." They all laughed. Then someone turned to my husband and asked, half joking, "Marriage can be fun too, right?" He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. "Honestly," he said, smiling, "I think I got married way too young. We both did." The table went quiet, just for a beat. Then the agreement started. Nods, comments about how early it was, how much life he must have missed. I was sitting right there. He didn't look at me when he said it, didn't check my face, didn't soften the words. I set my glass down slowly, very slowly. And in that moment, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt finished, completely finished. I looked at him, then at each person at the table, and I said calmly, "Well, it's never too late to fix a mistake." I stood up, placed cash on the table for my drink, and walked out into the Boston night without looking back. They thought it was impulsive. It wasn't. It was the final confirmation of something I'd been quietly documenting for 18 months. Before that night, before the steakhouse and the silence that followed, my life with Daniel looked solid from the outside. We met when we were both 22, fresh out of college, new jobs, big plans that felt endless because we were too young to imagine limits. I was working my first serious position in finance, proud but overwhelmed, trying to prove I belonged in rooms full of older voices. Daniel was ambitious, charming in an effortless way, the kind of man people naturally gravitated toward. He made friends everywhere. He made promises easily. And at that age, I believed promises were the same thing as commitment. We married 2 years after graduation. Everyone said it was fast. We said it was love. At first, it really was. We built routines together. Sunday grocery runs, late night takeout on the couch, quiet mornings where he'd kiss my forehead before work. I supported him when he decided to go back to graduate school. 3 years of tuition, 3 years of rent, groceries, utilities, insurance, repairs. I told myself that partnerships weren't about keeping score, that love meant carrying more weight sometimes. And for a while, I didn't mind. I was proud of him. Proud of us. But somewhere along the way, the balance shifted. Not all at once. Not loudly. Just enough that I started adjusting myself without realizing it. I stopped seeing friends as often because Daniel had a long week. I skipped trips because he felt left behind. I learned how to smooth his moods, how to avoid subjects that made him restless. His family adored me at first. His parents would thank me for keeping things together, for being patient while Daniel focused on his future. But gratitude slowly turned into expectation. I was the stable one, the responsible one, the one who should understand. And I did. Too well. There were moments I ignored because they didn't fit the life we were supposed to have. The night I overheard him texting someone late, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. The way he'd joke about feeling trapped when friends talked about traveling. How he'd light up around people who represented the life he thought he'd skipped. I told myself it was normal. Everyone wonders what if. Then came the messages. Nothing physical, he said. Just words. Just feelings he didn't mean. I believed him. We went to counseling for 6 months, sat on opposite ends of a couch while a stranger asked questions I already knew the answers to. Daniel promised he'd be more present, more appreciative, more careful. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But promises don't matter if behavior never changes. What he didn't know was that I had started noticing patterns, not obsessively, not angrily, just quietly. Dates, comments, who he said them to, little remarks about marrying young, about missing out, about feeling stuck, always said casually, always said to someone else, never to me. And every time I felt something small fracture inside me. I didn't confront him. I didn't argue. I listened. By the time we sat at that reunion table, I had already been grieving my marriage for over a year. I just hadn't admitted it yet. The steakhouse wasn't the beginning. It was the moment I finally accepted the truth I'd been carrying alone. The hardest part wasn't what Daniel said. It was how easily it came out. After that night at the steakhouse, people kept asking me if I was shocked, if it came out of nowhere, if I'd been blindsided. I hadn't. The truth was, the seeds had been planted long before, quietly, carefully, in moments most people would dismiss as harmless. It started with jokes, little comments tossed into conversations with friends. Man, sometimes I feel like I skipped a whole chapter of life. Everyone else has these wild stories. I went straight into marriage. He always laughed when he said it, like humor softened the meaning. I noticed how he'd linger on social media, scrolling through photos of old friends, traveling, partying, living lives that looked effortless and unburdened. When I asked what he was looking at, he'd shrug and say, "Nothing, just memories." But his mood would shift afterward, restless, distant, irritable over small things. His friends didn't help. At gatherings, they'd tease him about being the married one, about how he was the first to settle down, about how responsible he'd become. They meant it playfully, but I saw how it landed, how his smile tightened, how he'd drink a little more afterward. His family had their own way of applying pressure. His mother once laughed over dinner and said, "You two got married so young. I don't know how you didn't feel like you were missing out." I waited for him to push back. He didn't. Instead, he glanced at me, then changed the subject. That silence spoke louder than any argument. I started noticing how often I adjusted myself to keep him comfortable. If I planned something and he seemed reluctant, I canceled. If I was excited about my own milestones, I toned it down. If he seemed nostalgic for a life before me, I told myself it wasn't personal, but it was always personal. The emotional affair came later. Texts with a woman from his graduate program. Long messages, late nights, confessions he should have been making to me. When I confronted him, he cried, said he felt lost, said he didn't know who he was anymore. And I stayed, because that's what wives do when they believe love is enough. After counseling ended, nothing dramatically improved. There was no explosion, no betrayal scene worthy of a movie, just repetition. The same comments resurfacing in different rooms with different people. That's when I started writing things down, not to trap him, not to punish him, but because I needed to know I wasn't imagining it. Dates, exact words, who he said them to. Every time he told someone else, he felt stuck. Every time he wondered out loud what life would have been like if he'd waited. I never interrupted, never argued. I just listened and documented, because something inside me needed proof that this wasn't just insecurity on my part. And deep down, I think I already knew. By the time that reunion arrived, the air between us was already heavy with things unsaid. We were polite, functional, civil, but intimacy had turned into performance. Affection felt obligatory. Conversations felt filtered. I felt like a witness in my own marriage. That night didn't create the fracture. It simply revealed it in front of an audience. And once something is spoken out loud, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. The moment didn't explode the way people imagine betrayal does. There was no shouting, no slammed glasses, no dramatic accusation. Just a sentence, spoken easily, publicly, without apology. I think I got married way too young. When Daniel said it, my body reacted before my mind did. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. My shoulders went rigid. My heartbeat slowed in a way that felt unnatural, like everything inside me had gone quiet at once. The table froze, not because they were shocked, but because they were suddenly aware of me. Someone shifted in their seat. Someone cleared their throat. Then the validation began. Right after graduation, right? I couldn't imagine settling down that early. You totally missed your entire 20s. Daniel nodded along. Not once did he look at me. With each agreement, something settled into place inside my chest. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. This wasn't a drunk slip. This wasn't carelessness. And the worst part was realizing how long he'd been waiting for permission to say it out loud. I watched his face as he spoke, animated, confident, almost relieved. Like finally telling the truth felt good. That's when I knew. I set my glass down slowly, the base clicking softly against the table. The sound felt too loud in the silence. I looked at Daniel. Then I looked at each person around the table. People who had just agreed, casually, that my marriage was a mistake. Well, I said evenly, my voice steadier than I expected. It's never too late to fix one. No one laughed. I stood up, pulled cash from my wallet, placed it neatly beside my plate. I've got my drink, I said, and then I walked away. Behind me, chairs scraped. Someone whispered my name. I heard confusion ripple through the table, but I didn't turn around. Outside, Boston felt cold and sharp. September air filled my lungs as I unlocked my car with hands that didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I drove. Straight to my sister Claire's apartment in Cambridge, the place I'd already planned to go to weeks before. That was the part no one knew. This wasn't impulsive. For 18 months, I had been paying attention. For 18 months, I'd been listening to the same story, told in different voices. I slept on Claire's couch that night, staring at the ceiling while my phone vibrated endlessly beside me. When I finally checked it in the morning, there were 27 missed calls, 43 messages, anger, confusion, panic. The last voicemail came at 3:02 a.m. Daniel's voice was small. Please come home. We need to talk about this. Claire found me in the kitchen an hour later, pouring coffee. About time, she said quietly. I was wondering when you'd finally stop protecting him from himself. Around mid-morning, someone started pounding on the door. Hard. Claire answered, blocking the entrance. She doesn't want to talk right now, she said firmly. Daniel's voice cut through, trembling. This is ridiculous. It was one comment. I was drunk. I stepped into view. Let him in. Daniel rushed past Claire, stopped short when he saw my face. You embarrassed me, he said immediately. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was in front of my friends? I met his eyes. I embarrassed you? I asked calmly. Interesting perspective. I was just venting, he insisted. Everyone complains about their marriage sometimes. I reached for my phone, opened my notes app, scrolled. July 19th, I read aloud. You told your mother marriage was harder than you expected, and you felt stuck. His face drained of color. August 5th. You told your sister that if you could redo things, you'd have traveled more before settling down. I kept scrolling. August 22nd. You told Michelle you envied how free she was. September 10th. You told Jennifer you wished you'd lived alone longer. 3 days ago. You told Michelle you sometimes wonder if you married the right person. I turned the screen toward him. 15 times. 18 months. He stared at the list like it was something alive. You've been tracking what I say, he snapped. That's controlling. I've been listening, I replied. There's a difference. His defense faltered. It's just talk, he said weakly, blowing off steam. It stops being talk when it's consistent, I said. When you say the same thing to different people for a year and a half, that's not venting. That's how you actually feel. Silence filled the room. Then he tried something else. You're still holding grad school against me, aren't you? I looked at him steadily. What thing? I asked. Say it. His voice dropped. It was just texts with a classmate. Texts where you told another woman you were falling for her, I said. That you thought about her constantly. And I forgave you, I said. We went to counseling. I believed you, but you didn't learn gratitude. He swallowed. You learned I'd tolerate disrespect. That was the moment his silence told me everything I needed to know. After the words left my mouth, the room felt hollow, not tense, not explosive, just empty. Daniel stood there, staring at me like he was waiting for something else. Anger, tears, a breakdown. Maybe he thought if I yelled, it would prove this was emotional, fixable, temporary. But I didn't raise my voice. That scared him more. What do you want me to do? He asked finally, his shoulders slumping. What do you want from me right now? Nothing, I said. He blinked. Nothing? I've already done what I needed to do, I replied. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. His eyes followed it. I hired a lawyer 3 weeks ago, I said evenly. The papers are already drafted. The color drained from his face. You, what? Massachusetts is equitable distribution, I continued, calm, factual. We'll split everything fairly. I'll be out of the apartment by Wednesday. Please don't be there when I come to get my things. His voice cracked. You're serious? I've never been more serious about anything. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. What am I supposed to do about rent? I can't afford that place alone. I met his eyes. You make $60,000 a year now. That's because you put me through graduate school, he said, almost accusing. Yes, I replied quietly. And you're welcome. I can't cover $2,800 a month by myself. Then find a roommate, I said, or move somewhere cheaper. It's not my problem anymore. He looked at me like I'd just changed languages. I stood and grabbed my jacket. I'll be there in an hour, I said. Please be gone. He wasn't. When I arrived at the apartment, boxes in my arms, his parents' car was already parked outside. He'd called them. They walked in looking confused and worried, like parents stepping into a disaster they didn't yet understand. What's going on? His father asked gently. I'm moving out, I said. Daniel can explain why. His mother immediately reached for reconciliation. Every marriage has rough patches. Surely you can work through this. Ask your son what he said last night, I replied. Daniel went quiet. His father's tone hardened. Daniel? He muttered. I said something stupid. I said I married too young, he admitted. When I was drunk. And you've been saying it sober for 18 months, I added. I handed his father printed pages, dates, quotes, names. 18 months of quiet erosion. They read in silence. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. His father looked at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. You said all of this while she was supporting you through school? His mother asked softly. Daniel tried to deflect. She offered. I didn't force her. You didn't ask, his father said. You expected. I packed methodically while they talked. Clothes, documents, personal items. Daniel followed me from room to room, his voice desperate now. What about counseling? He asked. We haven't tried in years. We tried after your emotional affair, I replied. It didn't stick. His parents asked about finances, I answered honestly. Tuition, rent, living expenses. Over $100,000 over 3 years. How much have you been contributing since graduation? His father asked. Daniel didn't answer. About 20% of monthly expenses, I said. The rest goes into his savings. His parents were silent. His mother whispered. You were building security. For what? His father asked. From your marriage? That question hung in the air. By the time I loaded the last box into my car, something had shifted. No shouting, no blame, just consequences. As I drove away, I didn't feel victorious. I felt relieved, like I'd finally stopped carrying something that wasn't mine to hold. The days that followed didn't bring peace. They brought noise. Daniel called constantly. Left messages filled with anger, confusion, bargaining. When I didn't answer, he escalated, showing up unannounced, emailing, messaging friends to reach me. I didn't respond. On Monday morning, I called my lawyer the moment the office opened. On Tuesday, Daniel was served divorce papers at work. That's when the story changed. He called 19 times that day. When I didn't pick up, he showed up at my office downtown. Security called my extension. Your husband is in the lobby asking to see you. Tell him I'll only communicate through my attorney, I said. I heard later that he stood there for 10 minutes, stunned, before leaving. Wednesday morning, he sent a 2,000-word email. Accusations, justifications, blame. He said I was cruel, vindictive, that I was throwing away 8 years over one stupid comment. I replied with one sentence. You had 18 months to change. You chose not to. That night, his mother called me. She was crying. She's devastated, she said. Isn't there anything he can do to fix this? He can start by being honest with himself, I replied gently. She sighed. He's telling everyone you're controlling. I know, I said. 3 mutual friends already reached out. We believe you, she said quickly, his father and I. We saw the documentation. That mattered more than I expected. Friday evening, Daniel showed up at my sister Claire's apartment. He dressed carefully, brought my favorite takeout, had that hopeful look I used to fall for. Claire blocked the door. Really? She said. This again? I need 5 minutes, he pleaded. No, she said. You can talk to her lawyer. He started crying right there in the hallway. I don't want to lose her, he said. I made a mistake. I stepped forward. You didn't lose me, I said quietly. You decided I wasn't enough. I closed the door. 3 weeks later, we sat in a mediation office downtown. Daniel arrived with an expensive attorney, confident, rehearsed. My lawyer was calm, methodical. Daniel's lawyer opened strong. My client is willing to split all marital assets equally. My lawyer slid a folder across the table. Let's review the full financial history first. For the next hour, we went through everything, every payment, every transfer, every loan I'd covered. Then my lawyer introduced the emotional affair. Printed messages, dates, context. Daniel's lawyer went pale. They asked for a private conversation. When the door closed, Daniel leaned toward me. Please, he said, we can fix this. I'll do anything. Stop, I said. You don't fix 18 months of choices with promises. I was scared, he whispered. Scared of missing out. Scared of regret. And now you won't, I replied. You'll have exactly what you wanted. I don't want this, he said, panicked. I don't want to be single. You talked about feeling trapped, I said calmly. You're not trapped anymore. That's not fair. Fair would have been appreciating what you had while you had it. The lawyers returned. We reached an agreement. I received 60% of shared assets. He kept the apartment but had to refinance within 90 days. No alimony. He signed with shaking hands. I signed without hesitation. Outside, he tried one last time. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, repeatedly. What happens now? He asked. You figure out if being single is really what you thought it would be. I walked away. Over the next month, the fallout unfolded. Friends took sides. Some stayed neutral. Some quietly admitted they'd seen the cracks long before I did. Daniel told his version. One drunk comment, he said. But the people who were there knew better. And the truth has a way of surfacing, without anyone having to push it. The silence came after the chaos. That was the part no one warns you about. Once the calls slowed, once the emails stopped, once the paperwork was signed and the adrenaline wore off, I was left alone with myself. Not lonely in a dramatic way, just quiet. I moved into a small studio in Somerville. 1 room, 1 bed, 1 window that let in pale morning light. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. No shared furniture, no wedding photos, no reminders I wasn't ready to look at yet. At night, the quiet pressed in, not because I missed Daniel, but because for 8 years, I had been orienting my life around someone else's emotional weather. And now there was no one to monitor, no one to anticipate, no one to manage. That freedom felt heavier than I expected. There were moments, late, unguarded moments, when doubt crept in. Was I too cold? Too unforgiving? Had I walked away too cleanly? I'd replay the reunion in my head, his words, my response. People asked if I was okay. I always said yes. And it was mostly true. But some nights, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my phone, scrolling through old photos I hadn't deleted yet. Not because I wanted him back, but because I needed to understand how something that looked so functional could feel so empty by the end. The lowest point came quietly. One evening, I realized I hadn't spoken to anyone all day. No calls, no messages. Just work, gym, groceries, home. I sat on the floor with my back against the couch, dinner untouched on the counter, and felt something close to grief, not for the marriage, but for the version of myself who had stayed so long trying to be enough. That version of me was tired. She had believed patience could fix misalignment, that loyalty could compensate for ambivalence, that if she loved harder, he'd eventually stop looking elsewhere for validation. I cried that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just tears slipping down one at a time as I finally admitted the truth. I had been alone in that marriage long before I left it, and leaving didn't erase that reality. It just forced me to sit with it. I started therapy shortly after. The first session was awkward. I didn't know what to say when the therapist asked why I was there. My husband and I are getting divorced, I said. How do you feel about that? She asked. Relieved, I answered immediately. Then I stopped. Is that wrong? She smiled gently. There's no wrong feeling. Tell me about the relationship. So I did. The support, the compromise, the emotional affair, the 18 months of quiet documentation, the reunion. When I finished, she leaned back. It sounds like you grieved this marriage long before it ended. That landed harder than anything else. I wasn't broken. I wasn't detached. I was done. I had already done the hardest emotional work in silence. And now, in the stillness, I wasn't falling apart. I was recalibrating. That didn't mean it didn't hurt. It meant the hurt was honest and necessary. That realization didn't lift the weight immediately, but it gave the pain a shape. And for the first time since the steakhouse, I felt like I was standing at the bottom of something, aware that the only way left was up. The shift didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden surge of confidence. It came in fragments, small, ordinary moments that quietly reminded me who I was without constantly shrinking. It started with money. For the first time in years, I noticed my bank balance at the end of the month wasn't tight. I wasn't covering someone else's gaps anymore. I wasn't absorbing unexpected expenses, smoothing over financial shortfalls with my own stability. That realization was sobering. Then came time. Evenings where I didn't rush home. Weekends without negotiation. Plans made because I wanted them, not because they were approved. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years. People who didn't need explanations. People who didn't ask me to soften myself. One night, over drinks, someone said casually, "You seem lighter." I laughed it off, but I felt it. The real turning point came unexpectedly, through honesty, not confrontation. A mutual friend from the reunion called me one evening. We hadn't spoken much before. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," she said carefully, "but I wanted you to know something." I listened. She told me that even before I arrived at the steakhouse, Daniel had been talking about feeling tied down, about missing out, about wondering what life would have been like if he'd waited. "We thought he was just venting," she admitted. "We didn't realize how deep it ran." I thanked her. Not because it changed anything, but because it confirmed something vital. I hadn't overreacted. I hadn't misunderstood. I had simply stopped tolerating misalignment. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about value. Not his, mine. I had built a life where my steadiness made someone else comfortable enough to question whether they wanted it. That wasn't love. That was convenience. The realization didn't make me bitter. When Daniel tried to contact me again weeks later, therapy, reflection, apologies, I didn't feel tempted. I felt resolved. "I'm glad you're working on yourself," I said, but no. There was no anger in my voice, just certainty. That was new. I started saying no in other areas too. No to things that drained me. No to people who took more than they gave. No to the version of myself that stayed quiet to keep peace. The peace I was protecting now was my own. One afternoon, walking home from the gym, I realized something startling. I hadn't thought about Daniel all day, not with resentment, not with longing, just absence. That was the moment I understood power had shifted. Not because I'd won anything, but because I was no longer orienting my life around someone who didn't want to be there fully. I was choosing myself, not dramatically, not loudly, just consistently. And that choice felt stronger than anything I'd ever fought for. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, the way truth usually does. Quietly, then all at once. At first, Daniel tried to control the narrative. To friends, coworkers, distant relatives, he repeated the same line. She walked away over one drunk comment. Some people nodded politely. Some stayed neutral. Some believed him, at least until the details emerged. Because the people who mattered asked questions. And answers have weight. Friends who had watched our marriage from the outside began to connect dots they hadn't wanted to see before. The emotional affair, the imbalance, the way he'd spoken about our relationship when he thought I wasn't listening. A few reached out to me privately. I didn't know, they said. I thought you were fine. I'm sorry we didn't say something sooner. I didn't blame them. It's easy to miss erosion when it happens quietly. Daniel's family struggled the most. His parents didn't take sides publicly, but they didn't shield him either. When relatives asked what happened, they didn't minimize it. They didn't excuse it. They told the truth. He wasn't grateful, his father said once, quietly. He took stability for granted. That hurt him more than any argument ever could. Financial reality followed quickly. The apartment he'd insisted on keeping became a burden. Refinancing didn't go as planned. The payments were heavier without my income absorbing the weight. He asked his parents for help. They said no, not out of cruelty, but out of principle. You wanted independence, his father told him. Now you'll learn what it costs. That was when I understood something important. I hadn't destroyed his life. I'd stopped buffering it. Without me smoothing edges, absorbing pressure, and cushioning consequences, his choices finally landed where they belonged, on him. I heard through mutual friends that he was struggling, not dramatically, not tragically, but uncomfortably, adjusting to loneliness, to bills, to the silence of coming home to an empty space. The freedom he'd romanticized felt different in practice. No one celebrated that, but no one rescued him either. As for me, I didn't gloat. I didn't watch closely. I kept living. I settled into my routines, focused on work, expanded friendships, took care of my body and mind. When the divorce was finalized, the judge asked if both parties wished to proceed. Yes, I said without hesitation. Daniel hesitated, then whispered, yes. In the hallway afterward, he stopped me. I know now, he said quietly. You were right about everything. I looked at him. Not with anger, not with regret, just clarity. I know, I said. You deserve someone who makes you want to stay married, he continued. I didn't. That's true, I replied. He nodded, eyes glassy. I deserve this. That was the last honest thing he ever said to me, and it was enough. I walked away without needing the final word. Because the fallout wasn't about punishment. It was about alignment. And the truth had finally found its level. 6 months after I walked out of that steakhouse, spring arrived quietly, not dramatically, not symbolically, just warm enough to open the windows. My life looked different. Not bigger, not louder, just truer. I had my own place, my own routines, my own peace. I wasn't rebuilding from ruins. I was rediscovering myself without the constant background noise of being tolerated instead of chosen. People asked if I regretted leaving. I didn't. Because regret requires doubt, and I was certain. The lesson I learned wasn't about marriage or divorce. It was about alignment. Love isn't someone staying because it's comfortable. Commitment isn't someone choosing you after they've exhausted every fantasy of what else might exist. Real partnership is gratitude in action. Presence without resentment. choosing each other without having to convince yourself it's enough. Walking away didn't make me cold. It made me honest. I didn't leave because he said one careless sentence. I left because that sentence revealed 18 months of truth I'd already been living with. Sometimes the most painful thing someone can do for you is finally tell you how they really feel. Because once they do, you're free to stop pretending, free to stop shrinking, free to stop carrying weight that isn't yours. I didn't win. I didn't lose. I chose myself. And in doing so, I finally made space for a future that didn't require me to beg for appreciation or justify my worth. That, I learned, is what peace actually feels like.